So we have half an hour to introduce further TEI elements and other nice things that TEI supports textual scholars with. First, I start with a very brief repetition. So again, we always have to remind ourselves, why are we doing this? Why are we forcing ourselves using angle brackets and all this, and using this heavy oxygen application, which is maybe not the thing we would love to do, and instead have a nice book because we are all bibliophiles and so on. So what's the point of encoding text? So we really always have to keep in mind that we need to make explicit to the machine what is implicit to a person. So otherwise we can't process these information and create all the nice things that critical editions or digital editions can achieve. The second thing is, so we add, by encoding, we add value by supplying multiple annotations. So we enrich our information, all our knowledge and understanding about the text we are working with goes into the encoding. And the third thing is to facilitate the reuse of the same material. So all our work can then be presented and used in different formats. It can be used in different contexts, and it can be used by different users, ideally. So that's the idea of text encoding. Then again, TEI is XML, and you should by now be familiar with the rules of TEI. If you don't stick to the rules, you are lost. So it's a basic structure with the TEI root element. Everything starts with TEI and ends in TEI. It's like theology. So TEI is our world, and an XML document has elements, and these elements maybe have attributes if we need them, if they are useful. Then there are processing instructions, which we ignore because we are beginners. There are comments, and in the files we provided in the Google folder, there are some comments. You can also just make a comment, which will not be processed. So whatever you do, these comments are just as though they weren't there, but you can say whatever. So think of a birthday present for your colleague or something else. So this can help to structure your workflow and to remind yourself of things where you want to continue and so on. Then we have this entity references, so all these signs that are not usable because they have a function in XML, like the ampersand or the colon. No, the colon is not, and the angle brackets themselves. And we always have to make sure that we close our elements. So every element that has been opened needs to be closed, except it is an empty element. And you always have to make sure that you don't create overlapping structures. So you open an element, open another element, and close the first element before closing the element that is contained by the first element. So that doesn't work with XML. There are lots of workarounds to deal with these competing structures that we have. So just a reminder, I will introduce some additional sections in the TEI header. So our metadata, all information about our work, about our text, about our edition. So you have already the file description, which is mandatory, the only section in the TEI header that is really needs to be there. So otherwise it's not a TEI document. If there is no description of what your electronic text is about, then it's not TEI. So it's a very useful restriction, I would say. Then you might have an encoding description where you say something about the relationship of what you are doing in the code, in your transcript, and the actual source. You have a profile description where you can store a lot of additional information. We will see this very soon now. And a revision description where you describe the history of your electronic document, of the TEI document, where you can say, okay, there was a first phase and there were revisions that has been executed by colleague so-and-so. That is very important to keep track about the history of your electronic file. So now more concrete and very practical, I hope, more TEI. So I announce that we want to add further information to our TEI header. So you all have already a fairly advanced XML document, and I would like you, and we want to give credits to the persons who have been involved in creating this file. So especially, for example, you yourself, because you are doing the encoding. So we create in the addition statement, which is part of the file description, we create an addition statement where you already have a statement about the addition itself, and we add a responsibility statement, which just follows immediately on the same level after the addition element. And we can then define a responsibility, and this responsibility is then followed by, for example, a person name, which can be you yourself. So this will be also part of the text lab instruction of the exercise. And you can add, you don't have to, but I mean, it's useful. It's an academic enterprise where you also give tribute or have a statement about your affiliation. So your person name can be followed by the organizational name, your institution. And then you can define further responsibilities. So you can have one responsibility statement following another. You can create another statement about who created a transcript, who is responsible for normalization, for example. You find very few information in the Google document where the transcription and the translations are. And you can then transfer this information and encode it in the responsibility statement in the addition statement of your file. If you are struggling and you were not really able to follow me, this responsibility statement, what was it about? So always check the TEI guidelines. So here is the homepage of the TEI guidelines. Then you have the menu item guidelines, and there's a drop down, and you click on table of contents, and then you get here, and that is this is how the guidelines are organized. So like a book, it has a in the middle you have the chapters where the elements and attributes and ways to deal with textual phenomena are described in a very readable way with a lot of examples. And you have on the left further nice back matter, so what you would call indices or appendices in a book. And among these appendices, there is the Appendix C, which has the list of all available elements. And there's also an appendix about attributes, which is a little bit more complicated, but still, you should try to take benefit of these very well-organized guidelines. And here we are in Appendix C with all the elements, and there you can choose, so they're sorted alphabetically, and there you will find the responsibility statement. You click on the responsibility statement name, and there you come to the specification of the responsibility. So a short definition first, what is responsibility statement? It's a statement of responsibility. And you get more information. You get the information, so it's part of the module core elements. So it has to be, it is always with the most important elements of that are created by the TEI, provided by the TEI. Then you get some information, which attributes can I use on this particular element. And so member is, we can skip this. Then you have just a list. So this element can contain a series of elements, and only these elements can be contained by the responsibility statement, nothing else. So a page break would can cannot be contained by a responsibility statement. It has nothing to lose here. No, vice versa. So a responsibility statement can be contained by these attributes, and it can contain the following attributes: name, node, responsibility, org name, person name, basta. But most important for beginners, I would say, and also for advanced scholars, are the examples. So you have an example or several examples, and then there is on the right a link, show all, and you can see all the examples that are also listed and used in the written guidelines, and see, okay, what have the inventors and the community of TEI thought when they introduced this element, how to use it. So that's you understand by reading, because it's really a matter that you as textual scholars are familiar with. Okay, and you can go this way anytime. So if you want to know more about name, go to the specifications and you will find examples and a definition and many more information in a structured way on the specifications, and then check maybe the module where it is introduced in the guidelines. So I now want to introduce you to name, person name, place name. Person name you have been already introduced, because person name is, we have used it in the responsibility statement. Then we have something like place name, where you can encode place names, of course, organizational names. There's also object names. We won't make use of this here. So this has introduced only recently, a very useful additional, more specific element than plain name elements. So. We want to encode dates as far as they appear in our text or in the metadata. I will show you shortly. And numbers, especially if numbers are problematic, as we will see they are in the manuscript witness we are dealing with. Okay. You can check again in the guidelines, chapter 13, where names, dates, peoples, and places are introduced. So really, it is readable. It's not like a manual. It's written by textual scholars, and it can be understood. So you don't have to be a techie to understand what's described here. And in chapter 13.2.1, then you have a list of more specific elements of first names, surnames, and so on, with short descriptions. And you can click on the respective element and you will get to the specification table. Okay, we want to make use of the element first name because we want to encode first names. Because this is what editors usually do. They create, for example, indices. So usually at the end of the book, in a digital environment, you can be much more flexible and create various things when you have all names encoded. You can also refer this encoded person names like Marc Paul here in our text in question, and give it also a referent attribute with a hash and with reference to an ID. I will show you shortly what the use of this is or might be. So person name, you open the person name tag and close it after the referenced person. So in this case, Marc Paul, Rasta Paysan. Here you have also the expansion of the abbreviation Pisan, which is then all contained by the first name element. So nicely one into the other. The same, you do exactly the same with place name. You encode wherever you come across a place, a region, a country that is referenced, you encode this as a place name, and you put a reference attribute on it if you have a reference. And how do you create a reference point for what you just discovered in your text? For this, you enrich your header information. So contextual information is can be wonderfully organized in your profile description, which is one section of the TEI header, part of the metadata, not part of the text where the transcription is. So there is a place for a profile description, and in this profile description there can be a participant description. So all the people, person, actors who do participate in your text, and in this participant description, you can create a list of persons. So TI label is list person, and in this list you can have a series of persons that can be described in a structured way. So here, for example, we start with the person with the first name Mark Pohl, and this person, I gave this person an XML ID MP, so I can give reference when I encode Mark Pohl in the text. I give this ref element with the hash and the MP ID that can be found here in the list of persons. And we can then immediately see, okay, which person is it? So sometimes it's because it's abbreviated, maybe it's a nickname, but you can clearly identify any instance of this person or person name in your document. When you have an identifiable person listed here in the list of persons. Then you can add a lot of structured information. This is just an example. You can indicate something about the birth, about the death, about the role, about the occupation. Check person in the specifications or in the guidelines, and you will see a lot of possibilities to enrich this this data. So that really depends from your project, and we will use this section later to also include linked open data and references to resources that are outside, external to your TI document, because I mean, you don't have to be a scholar of each person that appears in your text, but you can rely on authority files of resources that are outside of or external to your document, and give reference here to other resources that can later be embedded in your digital edition. And how that works, you will learn in the next days. And you can add further persons. So this is also part of your assignment after this presentation. Here again, you get all the information about person and how to organize the description of the person in your metadata, in your TEI header. So there's a lot of stuff that can be contained by persons or a description of a person. And yeah, just maybe you have a look at the examples again, and you see, okay, this is really something which is easy to describe and is useful for anyone who's engaging with my text. So maybe specific information relevant for this particular edition or work you're dealing with. Places. So again, in the profile description, you can also include a setting description. So we just had the participant description with the person list, a list of person. You can, in the same way, create a setting description with a list of places, or list place, analogous to list name, list person. And it's just the same. So you give an ID to the place. It can be in whatever format. So I prefer human readable IDs. So this is Armenia. So when you give reference to Greater Armenia, Grande Arménie, then you can also read in your, understand in your reference value that what place you are actually referring to. But it can be also only a machine reader. It has to be unique. An ID can only be used once. So otherwise your document is broken. So this will also be part of your assignment to create, so just for getting some practice, some places in your list of places in the header, in the profile description. And here again, the specifications about place. Dates. So here's a wonderful passage. Autant qu'il courroie, décrit 1280 et 18 ans de l'incarnation. Also wunderbar. Das ist that's the French way of saying 1298. Yeah, you have the element date, and you can just wrap it around the indication of the date and give it an attribute where you can then specify or give this date in a standardized way. So at least the year or in day, month, year, I will show you now. You can also use other attributes because datation is a complex thing. It's not always very clear. Sometimes you can say exactly when, the year, the month, the day. Sometimes you can only specify the earliest possible date and just say it's not before that particular date. The other side is to say not after or from indicates the starting point of the period, for example, and to, which indicates the ending point of the period. And always ideally in a standardized way, year, month, date. And of course, you can combine these indication on your attribute. You can use two attributes on your element. So using not after and not before. And then you can describe the range of, or the time frame where something happened, for example. Here are, again, the slides are interlinked, so you can click on the PDF slides and you will get to this section in the guidelines where these examples are to be found. You can also, in the exercise, encode dates that are part of the header information. For example, where the history of the manuscript witness is described. This is even more useful because then when you have many manuscript witnesses, you can organize your witnesses according to the dates, for example. So that's a very useful way to making dates explicit and processable. But now, if we look at the text where this datation is to be found, it's the last row on the first column, I think. There you find CRI 1280 et 20 traits de l'incarnation. So our dear Professor Eugenio Burgio transcribed 18, not 23, because 23 doesn't make any sense. So that's not a Roman numeral anymore, or Roman French numeral. So obviously here's a mistake by the scribe. So this would add to 1303 actually. So that doesn't make sense. And if you know the other witness, you know, okay, the X, the second X in the 23. Can you see my cursor here? This should be V, a VU. So X, VU, V, and I. So 18 instead of 23. So how do we deal with this? So Eugenio Burgio just silently corrected, and he is happy with this, but we are, of course, very attached to our document, and maybe it's very important to have this difference. Maybe it's a clue to make conclusions about dependencies or the transmissions and the relationship in with other manuscript groups maybe have the same mistake. So we definitely want to encode this. How to do this? So there is the choice element where you can group alternative readings, encodings of one and the same unit. So here in the manuscript we have SIG, another element, SIG, which you know also from textual scholarship. So SIG means that is actually there. That's what you actually read, 23. But we know better and we correct it to 18. You could also add a responsibility, a RESP attribute. If you check the specification example of core, you sure come across the RESP attribute, and you can then indicate who is correcting here. Is it Eugenio Bourgeois? Is it Franz Fischer? Or is it somebody else? Who says this should be correct and not that variant? So you have the choice container, and within the choice container element, you have then two alternative ways of encoding your textual unit. So that has consequences as regards the way your text looks like. So it was all very nice and easy, readable in the original transcript, and now with all your encoding, you have to put it a line break, the date with an attribute, person name, if you wish, Christ, if you want. I mean, it's a little bit silly, but it is a person name. Then you have the numeral, so num is indicating a number. Then you have the expansion of et, which was actually abbreviation. Then you have the high ren superscript, because that's the French specific way of numbering the 80. So it's important that the two X's are a superscript, and then followed by the choice, sig and core, and then you close the num, and then you close the date, and then the paragraph ends, and then the division. So it becomes slightly messy, but you have to be very concentrated to close your text at the right moment. And you have to make decisions. Okay, do we need all this information? What do we really need to encode? Because all this then needs to be processed again. And then you might wish you wouldn't have been too close to your document. These are editorial decisions to be made. More choices, so you can organize also other elements. For example, original and regularized. So for example, in the first transcript provided by Elisa and by Sylvia, we have dinned, or done. I don't know how the old French guys pronounce this. Then Eugenio Bourgeois, I think I did even regularize it to make it more understandable, to introduce the apostrophe and an uppercase letter to make sure, okay, this is India actually. Otherwise, you just miss the point that here a place name, a country is being referenced. So you can keep the original orthography and provide a regularized one by introducing the reg element. All both contained because they are alternative. They can't be both. They are alternative, and they are then contained in the choice element. Then another thing. So if you look here in the rubric, why did I have this here? Because I want to talk about encoding abbreviations. Holger already pointed to the P with the stroke through the shaft. So in the second row of the rubric, you have the abbreviation P with a stroke through the P, and this can be read as par, por, per, whatever. And maybe we want to encode. You already expanded this, but oh no, oh, what's that now? Because they are interlinked now. Okay, yeah. You can. Maybe you want to record this information that this is a typical medieval P abbreviation that looks like that, and it's actually also a Unicode one. Otherwise, there are ways to describe abbreviations that are not already or will never be Unicode. So there are many ways to describe and make a record of specific abbreviation. Here, in this case, we have the respective Unicode sign, and we provide both, so the abbreviated form and the expanded form, both contained again in the choice. This is just to mention, you don't have to encode this in your exercise. That would mean you overdo it. But maybe it's important. If you have a paleographical interest, this is information you might want to convey. Again, editorial decisions. And again, even more choices, just to mention, not to be used here. This is a made-up example. CD le tiers chapitre. And I made up this because I didn't find any deletions by the actual scribe, him or herself. So is it the third or the fourth chapter? So something that can happen easily. So the scribe is distracted and is writing first, third, but instead it should be fourth. And so he immediately corrects his error, makes a deletion by expunction or whatever way, erasure or whatever, and adds the correct word, so fourth, quart, chapitre. So that would also be a way to convey this information. Just to mention, you don't come across deletions and additions in your document. But if you would, especially when you deal with modern manuscripts, they are full of these phenomena, of course, and maybe they're very important and interesting when you're interested in the process of creating the document. So if you have genetic additions, this is very, very important feature. And all these decisions, what to encode in what way, should be documented in some way. And for this, the header also has the encoding description section. Here you can give in a structured or in a more literary way, the way how you deal with all these phenomena. Did you expand abbreviation silently? What did you, how did you deal with, I don't know, corrections, with superscript, with initials? Do you ignore this? Do you convey this? So you should be explicit about all these decisions and inform the reader in your encoding description. But we won't go into this. If you're interested in this, check the specifications or the respective chapter in the guidelines. Now, the last thing I want to introduce, and then I'm done, is if you look at this page of the manuscript, what we did not touch at all right now is the most prominent feature of the page is the illustration, so the view of Venice. So, I mean, we are textual scholars, but of course, we don't want to ignore that information. Here's a very beautiful, very high quality image of a medieval illustrator. How do we deal with that in our TEI document? So here is a close-up. Paolo Monella will introduce you to a more refined way how to deal with this. But as a starting point, I introduce you to the element figure. So in your document, so in the result document of the last session, you are starting in the body with the division type prologue, and then you have the page break, and in your original document, then immediately the head comes along with the rendition in a rubricated rendition, and then the text starts. But we now want to include also information that before the actual rubric starts and the paragraph, there is the figure, and we can do this by opening the element figure. We can then describe the figure, the image. We can give it a head, which is something like a caption. So this is something we can then make up, so according to our style and preferences. So I choose a very simplistic way, view of Venice. Art historians will be much more elaborated on this. And then you can add a figure description following the head, where you can be very explicit about every detail here in your description, include a reference maybe to the image, whatever. So check the element figure and figure description respectively in the specifications and the guidelines, and you will see many ways how to capture information, provide information about this prominent feature of our manuscripts. And this is also something I would like you to do in your exercise. So here come the text lab instructions, what everyone is invited to do now following this section. You should continue with the document you have already worked with in the previous session. If you completely failed for whatever reason, or if your machine failed, please take the result XML, I think it's called end1 or one end, and enrich and introduce the following elements here. So create a responsibility statement, add information about the illumination, which we have just seen, encode any name you come across of a person or a place. Maybe you check because you're interested in it, Wikipedia or whatever other resource, and give some information that you then can store in the list of person and places in your header. So create also in the profile description a list of person and places. And then I think we have two dates. The other date, or its a time indication, is also silently corrected by Eugenio Borgio. So if you want to deal with this as well, so please encode dates and numbers. And the last thing I would like to ask you to do is to encode and correct errors. But there are errors. So it's the datation that is wrong. And the other number is also wrong. Okay, this was a tour de force, as we always do, but I think we have also a little bit time for questions. Otherwise, here's a small appendix if you are into manuscript description. Of course, this can be much more structured and filled with details, and also the contents of the manuscripts can be much more described in a much more structured and detailed way, but we don't care about this. We keep it as simple as possible and just create these additional encoding to the document we have been dealing with. Okay, I close this presentation, and if you have questions, I just have to find you.